We previously talked about the GDP deflator, as I like to call it, the Tom Brady index. Okay, so that is a measure of the average price level in the economy. So what are some alternatives to this? The main alternative is what we call the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. And so the Consumer Price Index is computed in a similar way with one small difference. So in the Consumer Price Index, what they do is they fix what they call basket of goods. In a base year. Right? So they decide, okay, what are the types of things that we like to buy? And for a typical consumer, that's what I call the basket of goods. And then all I do for the Consumer Price Index is I compare the cost of the basket in the current year to the cost in the base year. And of course, you multiply that by 100. Now, we're not going to do a lot of consumer price index calculations because, actually calculating it isn't all that helpful. We want to understand what it tells me and how to use it is the important part. So it's a very similar idea, right? In fact, this is kind of a very similar thing to nominal GDP. It's just the only difference here is that I'm only taking certain goods and services in the basket, not everything. So what's the difference between the GDP deflator and the Consumer Price Index is the following. The GDP deflator measures prices of everything produced. Literally everything in our economy that's produced shows up in the GDP deflator. So if the price of cement mixers goes up, the GDP deflator is going to go up. And so while that helps me understand how prices in general in our economy have changed, it might not necessarily tell me specifically about my cost of living. That's where the Consumer Price Index comes in. So the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, focuses more specifically on the cost of living for a typical household. Cost of living for a typical household. And that's the main difference. So they're both pretty similar and they both capture price changes in roughly the same way. It's just the CPI is going to be a little bit more specific to consumer goods, hence the Consumer Price Index. Okay, so that is a brief rundown of our price indices. So we've got CPI, GDP deflator. We know how to calculate at least the GDP deflator. We understand the basics of what we're doing. And now we're going to take these price indices in the next learning objective and learn how to use them to make adjustments for inflation, which is a really helpful topic to learn.